Imagine a place where punishment and rehabilitation once walked hand in hand, but over time the scales tipped, and the promise of reform gave way to overcrowding and violence. This is the story of Elmira Correctional Facility. Elmira Correctional Facility, located in Elmira, New York, holds a distinctive place in the history of the American prison system, primarily due to its pioneering approach known as the Elmira System. Established in the late 19th century, the facility was designed not merely as a place to confine criminals, but as an institution where rehabilitation was the central mission. At a time when most prisons in the United States focused almost exclusively on punishment, Elmira represented a radical departure from the norm. Its founding philosophy emphasized that crime was not solely the result of moral failing, but could also be influenced by social conditions, lack of education, and the absence of opportunity. This perspective laid the groundwork for an approach that sought to transform inmates, rather than simply contain them. The Elmira system was based on the idea that structured guidance, moral education, and vocational training could reshape the character and behavior of offenders. Unlike other prisons that relied on strict confinement and physical punishment, Elmira introduced a graded system of privileges and responsibilities. Inmates were classified according to behavior, effort, and attitude, and were rewarded with greater freedoms, better accommodations, and other incentives for demonstrating improvement. This concept of behavioral grading was revolutionary because it recognized that prisoners were capable of personal growth and moral reform if provided with the right environment and support. It also introduced a level of accountability, as inmates understood that their actions directly affected their privileges and opportunities within the facility. Education played a central role in the Elmira system. The administration recognized that many inmates had limited literacy and lacked basic educational skills, which contributed to their difficulties reintegrating into society upon release. As part of their rehabilitation, prisoners were provided with opportunities to attend classes, improve reading and writing skills, and even pursue vocational training in trades that could help them secure employment after release. By equipping inmates with practical skills, Elmira sought to address the root causes of criminal behavior and reduce the likelihood of recidivism. This approach contrasted sharply with traditional prisons of the era, where educational opportunities were minimal, and inmates were often left idle for long periods, which could exacerbate feelings of frustration and aggression. In addition to education and vocational training, the Elmira system emphasized moral and psychological development. Inmates were encouraged to reflect on their past actions, cultivate self-discipline, and adopt socially responsible behaviors. Religious instruction was often incorporated, and there was a strong focus on character building through mentorship and guidance from staff members. The philosophy underlying this system was that a well-structured environment, combined with meaningful engagement and moral guidance, could foster genuine rehabilitation. This human-centered approach was a stark contrast to the punitive methods commonly employed elsewhere, which often relied on harsh labor, isolation, and corporal punishment as primary tools for control. The physical design of Elmira also supported its rehabilitative mission. Unlike the dark, crowded, and often squalid facilities found in many prisons at the time, Elmira was constructed with the idea that a more humane environment could positively influence behavior. Open spaces, structured routines, and orderly living conditions were intended to encourage discipline, cooperation, and personal responsibility. Inmates were given a sense of structure that mimicked aspects of the outside world, preparing them for eventual reintegration. Even leisure and recreation were considered important, as supervised physical activity and constructive pastimes helped reduce idleness, improve morale, and foster teamwork among inmates. Another innovative feature of the Elmira system was its focus on individualized treatment. Prison officials assessed inmates based on their specific needs, strengths, and challenges, rather than treating them as a homogeneous group. By tailoring programs to address the particular circumstances of each prisoner, Elmira attempted to create a personalized path to rehabilitation. This individualized approach was notable because it recognized the complexity of human behavior and the idea that no single method could effectively reform all offenders. Such early attempts at individualized correction laid the foundation for later practices in modern correctional psychology and rehabilitation programs. The Elmira system quickly gained attention and admiration from reformers and prison administrators across the United States and even internationally. Its model was considered progressive, emphasizing the possibility of redemption and the practical means to achieve it. By focusing on education, skill building, moral guidance, and structured incentives, Elmira sought to transform prisons from mere instruments of punishment into institutions that could genuinely prepare individuals for successful reintegration into society. While the Elmira system would later face challenges as the facility evolved and circumstances changed, its early years represented a remarkable experiment in the history of criminal justice. The philosophy underpinning its creation, the belief that rehabilitation was possible and that inmates could be guided toward positive change, set Elmira apart as a pioneering institution and left a lasting influence on the development of correctional practices in the United States. The Elmira Correctional Facility did not merely stop at the foundational idea of rehabilitation. It also implemented a series of innovative methods that distinguished it from other prisons of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The so-called Elmira System was characterized by its structured, evidence-based approach to inmate reform, combining education, vocational training, moral guidance, and behavior management into a cohesive program designed to address the root causes of criminal behavior. At a time when prisons across the United States largely relied on punishment, strict confinement, and hard labor, Elmira offered a groundbreaking alternative that placed the inmate at the center of their own rehabilitation process. One of the most distinctive aspects of Elmira's approach was its grading system, which classified inmates according to their behavior, attitude, and progress in the program. Unlike traditional prisons, where punishment was uniformly applied regardless of individual circumstances, Elmira's grading system provided incentives for good conduct and personal growth. Inmates who demonstrated compliance with rules, engagement in educational and vocational activities, and a willingness to adopt moral and ethical behaviors were rewarded with higher grades. These higher grades, in turn, granted privileges such as better living conditions, greater freedom within the facility, or access to additional training opportunities. Conversely, poor behavior or failure to engage with the program could result in demotion to lower grades and loss of privileges. This system of rewards and consequences emphasized personal responsibility and self-discipline, reinforcing the idea that rehabilitation was both a personal journey and a measurable process. Education was a cornerstone of Elmira's rehabilitation methods, reflecting the understanding that many inmates had limited literacy and lacked the skills necessary to secure employment upon release. The facility offered formal classroom instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic, alongside vocational training in trades such as carpentry, metalwork, and printing. By teaching inmates practical skills, Elmira aimed not only to fill the gaps in their education but also to prepare them for productive employment in society after release. The focus on skill building was revolutionary, as it recognized that successful reintegration required more than moral correction. It required practical competence and the ability to support oneself legally. Education and training also served to occupy inmates' time constructively, reducing idleness, frustration, and the potential for disruptive behavior. Alongside education and vocational training, Elmira emphasized moral and ethical development as part of the rehabilitative process. Inmates were encouraged to reflect on their actions, understand the consequences of criminal behavior, and cultivate virtues such as honesty, self-discipline, and respect for others. This moral training was often reinforced through lectures, mentorship programs, and religious instruction, although it was designed to foster personal growth rather than impose rigid dogma. The facility's approach acknowledged that rehabilitation was not only about changing outward behavior but also about fostering an internal transformation of character, encouraging inmates to become socially responsible individuals capable of leading productive, law-abiding lives. Another innovative aspect of Elmira's methods was the integration of psychological observation and individualized treatment. Prison officials and administrators closely monitored inmates' progress, behavior, and responsiveness to the program. By tailoring guidance and opportunities to the specific needs of each inmate, Elmira recognized the diversity of factors that contribute to criminal behavior, including social background, education, mental health, and personal temperament. This focus on individualized rehabilitation was ahead of its time, anticipating later developments in correctional psychology and individualized treatment plans within modern prison systems. Each inmate's journey was unique, and the system sought to provide pathways for growth and reform that matched their abilities and challenges. Structured routines and disciplined schedules also played a crucial role in Elmira's innovative approach. Inmates were assigned to specific activities throughout the day, including educational classes, vocational workshops, physical exercise, and work duties. These routines were designed not only to develop skills and knowledge but also to instill discipline, time management, and a sense of order. By keeping inmates engaged in constructive tasks, Elmira minimized idleness and created a sense of purpose, which was essential for the success of its rehabilitative goals. Recreation and leisure were also incorporated, as supervised physical activity and social interaction helped promote mental and emotional well-being. Elmira's emphasis on rewards and incentives, rather than purely punitive measures, represented a profound shift in correctional philosophy. By fostering an environment where positive behavior was recognized and reinforced, inmates were motivated to take ownership of their rehabilitation. This method contrasted sharply with the prevailing punitive approaches of the era, which often relied on harsh punishment, isolation, or physical labor to maintain control. Elmira demonstrated that prisoners were capable of change when provided with meaningful opportunities, guidance, and a structured system that reinforced accountability and personal growth. The cumulative effect of these innovative methods was to create a holistic rehabilitative environment, one in which education, vocational training, moral guidance, behavioral incentives, and individualized support worked together to transform the lives of inmates. Elmira's model challenged the prevailing notion that prisons were solely places of punishment and demonstrated the potential for reform when correctional institutions approached incarceration with humanity, structure, and purpose. Through these groundbreaking approaches, Elmira Correctional Facility not only set a new standard for rehabilitative practices but also left a lasting legacy in the field of corrections, influencing subsequent prison reform movements and shaping modern approaches to inmate rehabilitation. While Elmira Correctional Facility began as a pioneering institution of rehabilitation, its trajectory over time revealed the fragility of reform in the face of overcrowding, limited resources, and societal pressures. The early ideals of the Elmira System, education, vocational training, and moral guidance, gradually gave way to a harsher reality as the prison population grew and the challenges of maintaining control became increasingly complex. The transition from a model of progressive rehabilitation to a facility marked by violence and tension reflects not only the internal dynamics of Elmira but also broader challenges within the American penal system. Initially, Elmira's structured approach and emphasis on personal development fostered a relatively orderly environment. Inmates were engaged in meaningful activities, closely monitored, and incentivized to demonstrate good behavior. However, as the years progressed, several factors began to undermine the effectiveness of these reforms. One of the primary contributors to the rise in violence was overcrowding, which became a chronic issue. The facility, originally designed to house a manageable number of inmates, saw its population grow far beyond capacity. Cells meant for a single prisoner often held 2 or 3, communal spaces were strained, and resources such as educational programs, vocational workshops, and recreational facilities were stretched thin. Overcrowding created conditions of constant tension, reducing the efficacy of Elmira's rehabilitative programs and making supervision more difficult for staff. Another factor contributing to the facility's violent turn was the changing composition of the inmate population. Over time, Elmira began housing prisoners with increasingly complex behavioral and psychological challenges. While the Elmira system was designed to rehabilitate those deemed reformable, the reality of prison assignments meant that some inmates had histories of severe criminal behavior or mental instability. The combination of these high-risk individuals with overcrowding and limited staff supervision heightened the likelihood of conflicts and altercations. The carefully structured grading and incentive systems that had once motivated inmates became less effective as the population grew more heterogeneous and resistant to reform. The diminishing capacity for individualized attention also played a crucial role in the rise of violence. Elmira's early success depended heavily on close monitoring of inmate behavior and tailored rehabilitation plans. As the inmate population expanded, staff-to-inmate ratios became insufficient, making it nearly impossible to maintain the same level of individualized oversight. Without consistent supervision, minor disputes could escalate into physical confrontations, and the overall sense of accountability weakened. Inmates who might have responded positively to guidance in the past now experienced neglect, frustration, or indifference, fostering an environment where aggression could flourish. In addition to internal pressures, external societal and institutional factors contributed to the facility's violent evolution. Public perception of prisons often emphasized punishment over rehabilitation, creating political and administrative pressures to focus on containment rather than reform. Funding for programs, staff training, and resources was limited, constraining Elmira's ability to sustain the intensive rehabilitative measures that had defined its early years. As programs were reduced or eliminated, the balance shifted further toward a punitive environment, and opportunities for positive engagement diminished. In this context, violence became both a symptom and a consequence of systemic neglect and underfunding. The nature of the violence at Elmira varied, ranging from inmate-on-inmate altercations to conflicts involving staff. Reports indicated that tensions in communal spaces, competition for resources, and personal rivalries often sparked confrontations. Additionally, the breakdown of the grading and incentive system meant that behavioral improvement was no longer consistently rewarded, further eroding inmates' motivation to adhere to rules. Without meaningful incentives or the promise of personal growth, some inmates turned to aggression as a means of asserting dominance, defending themselves, or expressing frustration. Efforts to manage violence included increased security measures, stricter supervision, and disciplinary protocols. However, these measures often had the unintended effect of reinforcing a cycle of hostility. Harsh enforcement could provoke resentment, reduce trust between staff and inmates, and create an atmosphere of tension where minor conflicts escalated rapidly. The facility's focus shifted from rehabilitation toward containment and control, and the early ideals of the Elmira system became increasingly difficult to implement in practice. Despite these challenges, Elmira's transition to violence was not absolute, nor did it entirely erase the influence of its rehabilitative origins. Certain programs persisted, and some inmates continued to benefit from educational and vocational opportunities. Nevertheless, the rise in violence highlighted the limitations of reform in the face of structural pressures, overcrowding, and a diverse, high-risk population. It served as a cautionary tale for correctional institutions, illustrating that even the most innovative systems can falter without sufficient resources, oversight, and institutional support. Ultimately, the shift from a pioneering rehabilitative model to a facility marked by violence and unrest reflects the complex interplay of environment, population dynamics, and institutional policy. Elmira's experience demonstrates that prison reform requires not only visionary design but also sustained investment, adaptive management, and the capacity to address the evolving needs of inmates. The facility's history serves as a reminder that the promise of rehabilitation can be fragile, and that maintaining a balance between reform, security, and humane treatment is an ongoing and challenging endeavor. Overcrowding has long been recognized as one of the most persistent and destabilizing challenges in correctional facilities, and Elmira Correctional Facility is no exception. While the prison was originally designed to accommodate a manageable number of inmates, over the decades, its population grew far beyond the intended capacity. This structural strain had profound effects on the facility's operations, the effectiveness of rehabilitative programs, and the overall safety and well-being of both inmates and staff. Understanding the dynamics and consequences of overcrowding at Elmira is crucial to comprehending the facility's broader evolution from a rehabilitative model to a site plagued by tension and violence. The physical infrastructure of Elmira was constructed with the assumption of a limited population. Cells, dormitories, communal areas, and program spaces were carefully planned to allow adequate personal space, supervision, and access to educational and vocational activities. However, as inmate numbers increased, these areas became congested. Cells designed for 1 or 2 occupants were often forced to house 3 or more inmates, creating cramped and stressful conditions. Shared facilities such as bathrooms, cafeterias, and recreation areas were overused, leading to long waits, disputes, and hygiene challenges. Overcrowding in such confined spaces naturally escalated tensions, making conflicts between inmates more frequent and more severe. One of the most immediate consequences of overcrowding was its impact on safety. When inmates are forced to live in close quarters without sufficient supervision, minor disagreements can quickly escalate into violent confrontations. Elmira's early rehabilitative programs, which relied on structured routines and graded incentives to encourage positive behavior, were significantly hampered by the sheer number of people in the facility. Staff members were stretched thin, unable to closely monitor all inmates or intervene promptly in disputes. As a result, instances of aggression, assaults, and intimidation increased, eroding the sense of order that the Elmira system had initially sought to establish. Overcrowding also severely affected rehabilitative and educational programs. Classes, vocational workshops, and counseling sessions were designed for a certain number of participants, with the goal of providing individualized attention and meaningful engagement. As the population grew, these programs were overwhelmed. Inmates received less personal instruction, vocational training became rushed or limited, and opportunities for mentorship and guidance diminished. In some cases, programs were temporarily suspended due to the lack of space or staff to manage larger groups. The reduction in rehabilitative opportunities meant that inmates were less engaged, more idle, and more likely to become involved in disruptive behavior, further fueling the cycle of tension and violence. Another consequence of overcrowding was the psychological impact on inmates. Being confined in cramped spaces for long periods with limited privacy or personal autonomy can exacerbate stress, anxiety, and feelings of frustration. In a high-density environment like Elmira during periods of overcrowding, these psychological pressures often manifested as irritability, aggression, and antisocial behavior. Inmates who might have responded positively to the rehabilitative framework of the Elmira system in smaller populations could struggle under the strain of crowded conditions. The lack of personal space and the constant presence of other inmates made it difficult for individuals to engage in reflection, self-discipline, or educational activities, undermining the very goals of the original system. Overcrowding also placed immense strain on staff, who were tasked with managing increasingly large and diverse populations. Correctional officers and administrative personnel faced higher workloads, increased stress, and greater risk of physical confrontation. Staff shortages meant that supervision became less effective, and the ability to maintain a calm and orderly environment declined. This combination of stressed personnel and overcrowded conditions created an environment in which both inmates and staff operated under heightened tension, and even minor incidents could escalate rapidly. The cumulative effect of overcrowding was a diminished capacity for rehabilitation and control. Elmira had once been celebrated for its structured environment, graded incentives, and individualized programs. Overcrowding undermined all of these pillars, making it nearly impossible to implement the rehabilitative framework effectively. Programs could no longer maintain the same level of quality or accessibility, and the grading system for behavior lost much of its influence because rewards and privileges were harder to manage in a dense population. The original vision of transformation and reintegration into society became increasingly difficult to achieve in the face of relentless population pressure. Furthermore, overcrowding at Elmira reflected broader societal and systemic challenges. The growth in prison population was driven by rising incarceration rates, changes in criminal sentencing policies, and limited investment in alternative correctional programs. Elmira, like many other institutions, became a microcosm of these trends, illustrating how external pressures on the penal system could directly impact the conditions and outcomes within a single facility. The challenges of overcrowding highlighted the limits of even the most innovative rehabilitative models when they are not supported by sufficient infrastructure, resources, and policy planning. In summary, overcrowding at Elmira Correctional Facility was not merely an inconvenience. It fundamentally altered the environment of the prison, undermined rehabilitative efforts, heightened tensions, and contributed to the rise of violence. The issue illustrates the fragile balance between reform and control within correctional institutions, showing that visionary approaches such as the Elmira system can falter when physical capacity and resources are stretched beyond their limits. Elmira Correctional Facility's classification as a medium to maximum security prison reflects both its historical evolution and the complex challenges it faces in managing a diverse inmate population. Security levels within prisons are designed to match the risk posed by inmates with appropriate controls, resources, and supervision. At Elmira, this classification has significant implications for the facility's operations, the daily lives of inmates, and the implementation of rehabilitative programs. Understanding the dynamics of security levels provides insight into how Elmira balances safety, order, and rehabilitation in a facility with a long and complicated history. When Elmira first opened, the focus was primarily on rehabilitation under the Elmira system. Security measures were relatively moderate, reflecting the belief that inmates could be motivated to reform if provided with structure, education, and moral guidance. The graded system of behavior and privileges allowed many inmates to enjoy increasing freedoms as they demonstrated good conduct. However, as the prison population grew and the challenges of overcrowding and violence emerged, the facility's security needs evolved. Increasing incidents of conflict, the presence of high-risk inmates, and the strain on staff necessitated the implementation of stricter security measures, moving the facility toward a dual-role classification encompassing both medium and maximum security. Medium security units at Elmira are designed to accommodate inmates who require supervision and control but are considered less dangerous or more manageable than maximum security prisoners. These inmates typically participate in structured programs, including vocational training, educational classes, and recreational activities. The environment in medium security areas allows for more freedom of movement and interaction among inmates, reflecting the facility's original rehabilitative ethos. Inmates in these units may work in workshops, attend educational courses, and engage in supervised group activities. The aim is to maintain order while providing opportunities for personal development and preparing inmates for eventual reintegration into society. In contrast, Maximum security areas are reserved for inmates deemed to pose a higher risk to staff, fellow inmates, or the broader public. These prisoners often have histories of violent behavior, repeat offenses, or serious criminal convictions. Maximum security units are characterized by tighter controls, including restricted movement, constant supervision, and limited access to communal activities. Cells are typically more secure with reinforced locks, bars, and surveillance measures. Inmates in these units may spend the majority of their time in their cells, with carefully scheduled periods for exercise, meals, and limited programs. Security protocols in these areas are designed to minimize opportunities for escape, violence, or the coordination of disruptive activities, reflecting the facility's need to maintain safety while managing high-risk populations. The dual security structure presents unique challenges for staff at Elmira. Correctional officers must constantly assess the risk posed by individual inmates and respond appropriately to incidents across different security levels. Staff must balance the enforcement of strict security measures with the maintenance of humane conditions and access to rehabilitative programs. For medium security inmates, staff are tasked with encouraging participation in educational and vocational activities, monitoring behavior, and applying incentives for positive conduct. In maximum security units, the focus shifts to control, observation, and prevention, which often requires heightened vigilance, advanced training, and precise coordination. The coexistence of these security levels within a single facility demands a flexible and responsive approach to management, with staff continually adapting to the needs and risks of a diverse inmate population. Security levels also shape the daily experience of inmates. Those in medium security units have greater opportunities for engagement, skill development, and social interaction, which can support rehabilitation and reduce recidivism. In contrast, maximum security inmates experience more restrictions, isolation, and regimented routines, which, while necessary for safety, can exacerbate stress, frustration, and tension. The facility must navigate the challenge of providing meaningful opportunities for personal growth even within the constraints of maximum security protocols, seeking to balance safety with rehabilitation. The historical context of Elmira further underscores the importance of its security classification. The early Elmira system relied on structure, incentives, and close supervision to maintain order and encourage reform. As the facility faced overcrowding and increased violence, the necessity of higher security became apparent. Security levels evolved as a pragmatic response to these challenges, ensuring that high-risk inmates were adequately controlled while maintaining opportunities for rehabilitation where possible. This evolution reflects the tension inherent in correctional philosophy, the need to protect staff and inmates from harm while remaining true to the ideals of reform and personal development. Elmira's medium and maximum security classification also influences the design and operation of programs. Educational and vocational initiatives must be adapted to different security levels, ensuring that inmates in high-security units can still participate safely, often through small groups or individual instruction. Similarly, mental health and counseling services must account for the limitations imposed by maximum security conditions while still addressing the psychological needs of inmates. The ability to provide such services effectively requires careful planning, sufficient staffing, and a commitment to balancing security with rehabilitation. In summary, Elmira Correctional Facility's medium to maximum security classification reflects both its historical legacy and contemporary challenges. It represents an attempt to manage a complex and diverse inmate population safely while preserving opportunities for rehabilitation. Security levels shape every aspect of the facility, from staff responsibilities to inmate routines, program availability, and the overall culture of the institution. The dual-role system at Elmira exemplifies the ongoing struggle in correctional facilities to maintain safety, order, and humane treatment in an environment that must simultaneously punish, contain, and reform. Despite the challenges Elmira Correctional Facility has faced over its long history, including overcrowding, rising violence, and the erosion of some of its early rehabilitative programs, the legacy of the Elmira system continues to resonate within correctional philosophy and practice. While the facility itself has evolved from a pioneering rehabilitation model into a medium to maximum security prison, the principles introduced at Elmira over a century ago laid the foundation for modern approaches to inmate reform, education, and structured rehabilitation. Understanding this legacy is crucial not only for appreciating Elmira's historical significance but also for recognizing how early innovations in correctional theory have influenced contemporary prison systems across the United States and beyond. The Elmira system was revolutionary because it was among the first correctional models in the country to prioritize rehabilitation over purely punitive measures. At a time when most prisons emphasized isolation, labor, and punishment, Elmira introduced a structured environment that sought to transform the character and behavior of inmates. This focus on reform rather than retribution was a major shift in penal philosophy, reflecting a growing recognition that criminal behavior could be addressed through education, moral guidance, vocational training, and structured incentives. By institutionalizing these practices, Elmira provided a blueprint for how correctional facilities could incorporate rehabilitative principles into daily operations, rather than treating such efforts as optional or secondary. One of the most enduring elements of Elmira's legacy is its graded system of behavior and privileges. This system, which rewarded inmates for good conduct, participation in educational programs, and personal improvement, demonstrated the effectiveness of incentive-based rehabilitation. Modern correctional facilities have adapted similar approaches, implementing behavior-based rewards, step-level systems, and earned privileges to encourage positive conduct. Elmira showed that inmates are more likely to respond to structured incentives than to arbitrary punishment, an insight that has informed correctional policy and program design for decades. The emphasis on education and vocational training at Elmira also had a lasting impact. Recognizing that lack of literacy, education, and marketable skills contributed to criminal behavior, the facility incorporated structured classes and vocational workshops into its rehabilitation program. Inmates were taught practical trades and skills, enabling them to find employment upon release and reducing the likelihood of recidivism. Today, educational and vocational programs are standard components of prison rehabilitation across the United States, and Elmira's early adoption of these methods can be seen as a precursor to contemporary initiatives such as GED programs, vocational certification courses, and post-secondary educational opportunities within correctional facilities. Another significant aspect of Elmira's legacy is its focus on individualized treatment and psychological observation. By assessing each inmate's behavior, progress, and specific needs, the Elmira system recognized that effective rehabilitation requires a tailored approach. This principle has informed modern correctional psychology and offender management, emphasizing individualized treatment plans, mental health support, and customized rehabilitation strategies. Elmira demonstrated that a one-size-fits-all approach to incarceration is insufficient and that addressing the unique circumstances of each inmate increases the likelihood of successful reintegration. Moreover, Elmira's integration of moral and character development into its programs highlighted the importance of holistic rehabilitation. Inmates were encouraged to reflect on their behavior, cultivate ethical habits, and develop self-discipline. While modern prisons often emphasize skills training and education, Elmira's approach underscored that personal growth, moral reflection, and emotional development are critical components of reducing recidivism and preparing inmates to live productive, law-abiding lives. Many contemporary rehabilitation programs continue to incorporate elements of counseling, mentorship, and character education, reflecting Elmira's enduring influence. Even though the facility later faced overcrowding, violence, and resource challenges that diminished some of these early reforms, the Elmira System's principles continue to inspire correctional reform movements. Advocates for prison rehabilitation frequently cite Elmira as an example of how humane treatment, structured programs, and individualized attention can create meaningful change. Its model has influenced both policy and practice, encouraging correctional institutions to integrate education, vocational training, behavior management, and psychological support into their programs. Elmira's early experiments demonstrated that prisons could be more than instruments of punishment. They could serve as environments for personal transformation and societal reintegration. The legacy of Elmira also extends to its symbolic value within discussions of penal reform. It represents a vision of incarceration that balances accountability with opportunity, discipline with development, and structure with humanity. Even in an era when the facility operates under more restrictive and security-focused conditions, the historical significance of Elmira reminds policymakers, administrators, and the public that correctional institutions have the potential to shape lives positively, rather than merely contain individuals. This enduring lesson continues to influence debates about prison reform, sentencing policy, and the allocation of resources toward education, mental health, and rehabilitation. In essence, Elmira Correctional Facility's legacy is one of innovation, experimentation, and enduring influence. The Elmira system demonstrated that structured rehabilitation, incentives for positive behavior, vocational training, education, individualized attention and moral guidance could coexist within a correctional setting, offering inmates a genuine opportunity for reform. While the facility's later challenges revealed the fragility of these ideals, the principles pioneered at Elmira remain embedded in modern correctional philosophy and practice, serving as a benchmark for humane and effective approaches to incarceration. Even after more than a century of operation, Elmira Correctional Facility continues to grapple with complex challenges that affect both its inmates and staff, reflecting broader systemic issues within the American penal system. While the facility's early Elmira System introduced pioneering rehabilitative practices, the realities of modern incarceration, including overcrowding, resource constraints, evolving inmate populations and security demands, have required ongoing adaptation and reform. Understanding these contemporary challenges offers insight into how Elmira balances its dual role as a medium to maximum security institution while attempting to uphold elements of rehabilitation and humane treatment. One of the most persistent challenges is overcrowding, a problem that has been exacerbated by decades of rising incarceration rates and changes in sentencing policies. The facility often houses more inmates than it was originally designed to accommodate, straining physical infrastructure, programs, and staff capacity. Overcrowding intensifies tension among inmates, heightens the risk of violence, and reduces access to educational and vocational programs. Cells designed for single occupancy are often shared. Communal facilities such as cafeterias and recreation areas become congested, and staff must supervise larger groups under increasingly stressful conditions. This structural strain has a cascading effect, making it difficult to maintain safety, order, and the rehabilitative elements that Elmira was once known for. Another critical challenge is mental health and behavioral issues among inmates. A significant portion of Elmira's population includes individuals with histories of mental illness, substance abuse, or trauma, which require specialized interventions. Addressing these needs is complicated by limited mental health staff, restricted resources, and the pressures of security. Mental health challenges can contribute to behavioral incidents, making the management of medium and maximum security inmates more complex. Elmira, like many modern prisons, must navigate the delicate balance between providing adequate psychological care and maintaining institutional security, a task that requires training, resources, and ongoing assessment of programs and policies. Security management itself remains an ongoing challenge. Elmira operates as a medium to maximum security facility, meaning that staff must manage a highly diverse population with varying levels of risk. Maximum security inmates require heightened supervision, restricted movement, and strict enforcement of protocols, while medium security inmates benefit from greater freedoms, educational opportunities, and structured engagement. This dual structure places enormous demands on staff, who must continuously assess risks, prevent conflicts, and respond to incidents effectively. Maintaining security while providing opportunities for rehabilitation requires careful planning, specialized training, and constant vigilance. In response to these challenges, Elmira has implemented a variety of reforms and programmatic innovations over the years. Educational programs, vocational training, and life skills workshops remain central components of the facility's rehabilitative approach, though access is often limited by staffing and space constraints. Mental health services, counseling programs, and substance abuse interventions have been expanded to address the complex needs of the inmate population. The facility has also introduced behavior management initiatives, such as incentive-based programs and structured routines, designed to reduce conflicts and encourage compliance with rules. These reforms reflect an ongoing effort to balance safety with rehabilitation, demonstrating that Elmira continues to adapt in response to evolving challenges. Staff training and development are also key components of contemporary reforms. Correctional officers at Elmira must be prepared to handle a wide range of scenarios, from managing violent incidents to supporting rehabilitative programs and responding to mental health crises. Training in de-escalation, crisis intervention, and behavior management helps staff maintain safety while fostering a more constructive environment for inmates. Staff development initiatives aim to improve communication, consistency in rule enforcement, and the ability to implement rehabilitative programs effectively, recognizing that personnel are central to the facility's ability to function successfully. Technology and infrastructure improvements have also been used as tools for reform. Enhanced surveillance systems, secure access controls, and monitoring technologies support safety in both medium and maximum security areas. At the same time, technology is leveraged to expand educational opportunities, offering inmates access to digital learning, vocational simulations, and resources that were unavailable in earlier eras. These measures reflect Elmira's ongoing effort to modernize operations while maintaining a focus on rehabilitation and security. Finally, policy and systemic reform remain crucial. Challenges at Elmira are intertwined with broader trends in criminal justice, including sentencing practices, parole policies, and resource allocation. Advocates for prison reform emphasize alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders, diversion programs, and community-based rehabilitation as ways to reduce overcrowding and improve outcomes for inmates. Elmira's current challenges underscore the fact that meaningful reform requires coordination between individual facilities, state policies, and national strategies, highlighting the interconnected nature of correctional issues. In conclusion, Elmira Correctional Facility today faces a complex landscape of overcrowding, security management, mental health needs, and operational constraints, yet it continues to implement reforms aimed at maintaining safety while providing opportunities for rehabilitation. Programs in education, vocational training, mental health, and behavior management demonstrate the facility's ongoing commitment to balancing security with personal development. Elmira's contemporary challenges serve as a reminder that even facilities with a proud history of innovation must continuously adapt to meet the evolving needs of inmates, staff, and society, reflecting the enduring tension between punishment, control, and the pursuit of meaningful rehabilitation.